The portal is a living, thinking community. Becoming a member of the portal gives you access to 4 live events every month, but more importantly, an opportunity to learn how to think with others, to learn with online creators and para academics, and to develop your own capacity as a philosopher. Becoming a member of the portal also gives you access to the history of our recordings, as well as discount access on past and future courses. This year, members also get exclusive access to the Slovenian School Reading Group, as well as the year-long course focused on Deleuze and analysis. To learn more or to sign up, visit philosophyportal.online. Welcome to another philosophical conversation. My name's Cadell Last, and I'm here today with a friend of the channel, Russell Sbriglia. Russell was on last year to talk about his contributions to a book titled Subject Lessons, and highly recommend checking out that talk as well as that book. Today, we are still going to be talking about theory, Zizkian theory, Lacanian theory, psychoanalysis, continental philosophy, but it's going to be through the lens of an artistic project. Russell is the member of a band called Misconstruity. They just released an album titled The Critique of Pure Desire. Amazing title. So, Russell, why don't you just give us a little bit background on the band, this album, and then we'll talk a little bit about the theoretical, philosophical inspirations.
Yeah, well, first of all, Cadell, great to see you, and thanks for having me on to talk about the album. It's for a long time my academic and musical or theory and musical pursuits or interests were separate, but they really kind of they were on a collision course and they kind of collided in this album or on this album. But Misconstruity was, I mean, I started it in 2000. I feel really old now, but I started it in 2000, and it was basically like a 5-song demo where I played all the instruments on it and sang, and then I more or less recruited a band based upon that, and my brother was the drummer, and a couple of his friends, well, we were all friends, but Bill and Tom then joined the band as a bassist and guitarist, and we were kind of like earlier, before all of these other big emo bands or emo as a genre sort of blew up and became, went mainstream. We were playing that kind of music, and we were a fully, functioning performing band. We did some light touring and, played some shows out of town. And then we broke. We released an EP and a full length record, an LP, and then we more or less broke up because I decided I wanted to go to graduate school. And so we did release an album in 2015, which was psychoanalytically influenced. It's titled K-Voy, and it has Lacan's the third of the 4 graphs of desire, the K-Voy graph of desire, on the cover of it. But it wasn't quite as, despite that, it wasn't quite as heavily or as as thoroughly psychoanalytically influenced as this new record was. But on that last one, we were still a band. We got back together to play basically like a 10-year reunion show around 2013, and that turned into we made a record. But because all the other members live far apart from each other, so I'm in New Jersey, just outside of New York City. My brother and the original bassist Bill, they both live in Buffalo, New York, and then Rob Gock, who is the fourth was the fourth to join the band, but now it's basically just the two of us. He lives in San Francisco, so he's on the entirely different coast from me. So this record came about basically just because Rob and I continued to demo songs and send stuff to each other and collaborate. So it's a different project from anything that we've done before, because whereas the earlier stuff was the result mostly of 4 people in a room sort of organically hashing out music, coming together, this was like, just, we knew from the start that it's going to be just a studio album, and that these songs, they can be reproduced live, but you would need 5 or 6 other people to do them live. So it was kind of like there were no limits to it. So that's why we leaned in so heavily, I think, to to try to make it a concept album, because it is a concept album. And our friend, I didn't even think about this before, but our friend Mikey Downs said, well, it's not just a concept album; it's a concept album in that it's full of all these philosophical and psychoanalytic concepts. But that's how we arrived, or how I arrived at just the sort of scope of the project was what led to it going down the road of becoming something psychoanalytic and philosophical, uh, so, clustered around this, or centered around this idea of, which comes from Slavoj Žižek, this term or phrase, a critique of pure desire.
Amazing. And I think that, the theory bleeds throughout the entire project. I mean, so I completely second what Downs is saying about this is not just a concept album, it's a concept album. And that, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, that might be a riff on, that line by Jay-Z where he says, "I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman. Let
Businessman.
me handle my business." Damn, I think that's really, like, there are concept albums. I mean, I'm thinking about, right off the top of my head, I'm thinking about something like Kendrick Lamar's "A Good Kid, Mad City," but like,
Mhm.
this album does differentiate itself from any other concept album I've listened to or studied, in a sense, because uh again, like, there's theoretical gems in every song. There's, like, there's dense theory in littered throughout the entire lyric, and not just that. I mean, I want to say, like, this isn't even just an album in a sense. It's really a piece of art in like the highest sense. Like, I can't speak highly enough about the amount of time and attention that went into the book jacket and all of the different artwork for every song. I mean, so it's really a complete work. So was that the goal from the beginning? What, were your ambitions to be, in a sense, even more than music, to make something that's deeply philosophical, to make something that's highly artistic in its illustrations and cover art?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, Cadell, I really appreciate that. Thanks for that. I wouldn't. I'm hesitant to say, something like, oh, it's an art rock project, even though I mean, I think it could sort of fit that bill. But I let's see where to start. I guess I would say that I didn't, or we didn't start off um, planning for it to be as psychoanalytic or as philosophical or as heavy conceptually as it ended up being. So we I, the music, always we always write the music first. Once in a while, if start I'll try putting lyrics and vocal melodies to a song that's not fully finished or fleshed out, just because if I'm inspired or something. But usually, it's all the music is written. In this case, all 10 songs, the whole album was musically was written and recorded before I'd even started to think about lyrics. And so I think, just it's the third album that we've done, and every time it's like anything else, or any other sort of art form, or even writing. The more you do it, I mean, usually the better you get at it, or the more confident you become at it. And so this was kind of the result of taking all the accrued knowledge and experiences from working in the studio on previous projects and albums. And so musically, it was very methodically planned out. I demoed the record a couple, like all the way through, two or three times before we even recorded it. And so that sort of helped plan the music meticulously. But because the music was more complex, there are certain strains of it in earlier misconstruity projects. Even on our first record, which is from 2003, there's a song called "Anime" on that, which of course, like, is I think I was taking an existentialism class at the time when I was in college, and so, and that, both conceptually and with regard to the music, we leaned into a little bit of a sort of proggy direction. but it was always, we always kind of reined it in. And so on this record, we kind of took the most like excessive or I don't know, extreme or grandiose kernel of songs from other records and basically said, well, let's elevate that to the whole record. And so the um, the amount of layering and sort of complexity that went into the planning of the music, we had this big sounding record. And so then when I was coming up, okay, so what do I do lyrically? That the sort of the scale of the music is what sort of pushed me to go big conceptually and philosophically, I would say. And so I didn't set out to necessarily do that, but once I started running with it, I just kept going with it and was committed to it.
It when you're describing the influences of early influences of progressive rock music and sort of laying down the music before actually developing the lyrics or the conceptual content, it kind of reminded me of, or now just make the connection between what you're doing and the kind of music like Coheed and Cambria. I listened to a lot of them when I was younger. I don't know if that was a specific influence for you or for Misconstruity, but of course, conceptually speaking, and we'll get into it, this work is inspired a lot by Zizek and Lacan and psychoanalysis. But musically, what kind of bands, what kind of music have been like primary influences for Misconstruity?
Yeah, it's so interesting that you mentioned Coheed and Cambria because uh, I, I hear that I've heard that from probably half a dozen or more times from people, and this is I'm being entirely honest here. I've probably heard maybe like two or three Coheed and Cambria songs, and what I've heard, I've liked, but I don't, and they've been around for a while now, so they're still
Yeah, just because
performing,
they
and
make
so
very grandiose
they
music
do, yeah.
and
And that's kind of where like a friend of mine basically said the sort of same thing, like or something similar, like the sort of grandiosity of it reminded them of Coheed. So I've been meaning to listen to them for so long. The now deceased Taylor Hawkins plays drums actually on one of their studio albums. So I he's one of my favorite drummers, so I should listen to it. But I don't listen to, I mean, that's not even really contemporary, but I don't listen to a lot of stuff. I kind of listen to older. So when I was younger, my uncle sort of started me off in on all of like 60s rock, pop rock basically. So the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Monkees and stuff. And then I was just going into my teens when grunge happened, and so I was a huge fan of Nirvana, and like certain, like not really that early. I guess now it's early, like MTV culture, and but I also like classic rock, Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, but Misconstruity, when we formed, the biggest influence on us was probably the band Sunny Day Real Estate. And bands like that are, were considered, they're not even first wave. There were earlier bands that are often cited as the progenitors of emo, like Rites of Spring and Fugazi. But bands like Sunny Day Real Estate, Jimmy Eat World, especially some of their earlier stuff, those were sort of huge influences, and then other sort of post-hardcore alt rock bands like At the Drive-In, Thursday, sort of like indie. Well, they're not really indie, but like independent, sort of underground. Although Thursday blew up for a little bit for a while, but anyway, that kind of stuff. And then the biggest influence probably as far as going in the sort of more complex or proggy direction, is the band, and they're one of my favorite bands. And the people who are familiar with that band will hear the influence on the record. The band, the Mars Volta.
I was gonna say Mars Volta. That's what I was
Yeah,
gonna.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's clear.
Mars Volta is like there are two bands that change. Well, maybe three, because I mean, you don't. There, it's not. It's much. It's heavier, but Radiohead is also a big influence. But the three bands that basically changed my musical orientation, or that really sort of rewired me, or blew my mind in a way when I encountered them, what were um, Sunny Day Real Estate. The first time I heard that, it was different from melodic in this weird sort of cryptic way, with the falsetto vocals, um, so Sunny Day Real Estate, that was a changing experience. Um, Radiohead, and then the Mars Volta. I still remember being at I don't know if it was like a New Year's Eve party or something, because Mars Volta is made up of the two members who comprise the core of Mars Volta. Cedric Bixler Zavala and Omar Rodriguez Lopez were both in at the drive-in, and I was a huge fan of theirs. And then they factioned off into like two different bands, and the other members of that band formed a band called Sparta, and Sparta put out an EP first, and they were similar to At the Drive-In, and I loved Sparta. But I remember I was at a party talking to somebody, a friend, or an acquaintance, and I said, have you heard the Sparta EP? And he said, yeah, I've heard it, but have you heard of this band, the Mars Volta? Their first release was called the Tremulant EP, and I was like, no, I haven't heard. And he said something like, yeah, it's gonna make this seem like sort of kindergarten or something like that. I mean, he was, and I just want to be. I don't feel that way about Sparta. I love Sparta, so I'm not trying to come down on them, but so I went to the local record store like the next day and found that Mars Volta EP and put it on, and I was like, what the hell? What the hell is
Yeah, they're
this?
next level.
Yeah. And then so much so that when their first album, this was the days of, early days of Napster and everything like that. And when that first album, Deloused in the Comatorium, came out,
I was
I
gonna
got
say that one.
an advanced, I got some sort of like advanced audio version of it that was leaked, and the songs were out of order actually. So I had to relearn
Oh,
the order of
crazy.
the album. Yeah. But I was like, I don't know how they're doing what they're doing, but
Yeah.
that totally changed my what I wanted to do musically.
Yeah, man. I wasn't like huge into the rock scene, but like that album sticks out, and that band sticks out as, like undeniable talent. Like they're doing something unique, they're doing something different. It's like, yeah, it's one of those groups that like transcends genres and like defines a new sound, and yeah, fantastic. So yeah, that's cool. That bleeds through. I would definitely like, yeah, because I was a huge for a while I was huge into Coheed as well. So I would definitely I'll recommend some songs, some
Yeah,
tracks
no,
from
that would
them
be
as well.
great. Yeah,
Like
if you steer
yeah.
me, yeah, I would love, because it's way past due that I do
It's
an
not the
actual
yeah,
deep
they're
dive.
not I mean it's I don't know if they're still making music now, but like back in the early
They're still
2000s I felt like they were.
they're still touring. A friend of mine, went on. They actually do. I don't know if it's annual, but they do one of these like cruise things where it's them and a couple other bands go on a cruise with fans, and they play, I think, a show like maybe one or two shows a day. So I know that, I don't know if they're releasing new material, but I know that they're still performing.
I just like I guess the one thing I would say about them that like sticks out, and what like kind of I mean, what you guys are doing and what Misconstrued is doing seems to me to be totally unique in the philosophical theory scene, and
Mm.
bringing that to bear on music to the degree that you have. But like the thing that stuck out to me that's similar about Coheed is like the conceptual scope is almost like you're listening to a graphic novel. Like it's not just like, and I guess that's the connection, is like when I'm listening to the Misconstrued album, and when I'm going through the track list and the lyric sheet that you guys have provided. Yeah, it's kind of like you're working through like a philosophical textbook in the best way possible. Like not saying maybe textbook's not the right word, but like it's kind of like you're going through a philosophy class at the same time as you're listening to music, and like this, like I mean that in like so in the best way possible. And it's
Yeah.
interesting to think about that in regards to the split that you're talking about, like saying that you guys disbanded because you had to go to grad school, and like there's the split between art and intellect. And then now you're working with that split directly in an interesting way. I think for me, like there was a similar thing where like I was completely into sports, and then I had to give that up for because I was pursuing grad school.
Yeah.
um but trying to reconcile with that split in a certain way, like kind of trying to bring the energy of sports or the energy of athletics into philosophy, or trying to find a way to work with both those dimensions of myself. So on a personal level, like how's that going for you, like working with that split between music and theory? It must be like feel like a great accomplishment in a way to bring them together in such a full project.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I really I like that likening of it to going through a graphic novel or a philosophical text. And I think
Yeah.
you'd mentioned the artwork, and I think the artwork ended up being a big part of reinforcing that because, well, the way everything fell into place once I had the concept of critique of pure desire, and each song each song, like, I chose a work of literature or film that, and I think that it's accurate to greater and lesser degrees depending upon the song. um, like a song like "Let Them Rot" or the last song "Future History," those are very specific, or maybe Malin Genie, are very specifically like staging critiques of pure desire. But anyway, once I had that idea and that each song would be based on a work that staged as a critique of pure desire, and also the fact that, so the album took a long, the post production process was quite long because the amount of work that our co-producer on the record, who he recorded, he engineered, he mixed the whole thing, Jay Zubricki, who we've done every since our first album, we've done everything with him. He's who we record with, and he's great. But it was such an involved project, and he's working on a million other things. Most projects of this scope have five or six other people working on it. Like, there's a few engineers, there's maybe sometimes multiple people mixing, or mixing assistants, and so actually the art came together in a way because Jay was mixing the record in stages, so it took about, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 months or so. So when a song was we basically identified these are the songs we want to release as singles, and we were putting out singles. Like, the first single from the record, "Carnival," came out almost a year ago now. I think it was like October 29th of 2024 when we released it. And my friend who did the artwork, he goes by the handle or the moniker Computer Blood, and it's one word, and the O's are zeros. And just knowing his work, based upon the musical and lyrical content, I thought, okay, this will reinforce. If I can get him to do it, it'll reinforce it. But because I was asking him to do an illustration for the singles, by the time we got to, like, the third one, I was like, okay, why don't I just see if he can do an illustration for each song? And then it'll almost be kind of like a graphic novel or a booklet where you're sort of flipping through it, and it's almost like a song is a chapter in a way. And so that's how
Yeah.
we arrived at that. And so I mean,
Yeah.
the album wouldn't, I think musically it still would have tied together, but I think the artwork only serves to reinforce that. And I also, like you said, graphic novel, because the artwork is
Yeah.
also graphic. But as far as the philosophy and psychoanalytic theory and music, honestly, I was a little bit concerned at first that it would seem too sort of like insular, or like extremely niche, right? Um, I mean, I know because I've seen the YouTube views, but I know there's a good audience, a considerable audience that tunes into and watches and follows Philosophy Portal, for instance. But in the grand scheme of things, like that's still very niche compared to like what most musical artists are trying to achieve. So I was I was kind of I was a little bit self conscious about that at first, but then I thought, okay, I'm not making this music, or we're not making this music to uh, end up on the Billboard Hot 100 or something like that. And it's
Right.
not intended to be popular music in the sense. I mean, if it gets popular and people like it, great. I have nothing. I would love that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, yeah.
the goal was not to for it to be sort of like inviting to everybody. It was more or less like, let's just see the project out to its fruition. And I think that ended up being a good choice because from what I've been hearing, we did not set out to be, well, we're going to make a theory rock album, or we're going to be the only band that combines abstract abstruse philosophy and critical
Right.
theory with music. But just because that's what I do. I mean, it basically came out that way, and so if it's unique in that regard, it wasn't planned. It just happened.
Right. In any case, I'm really a fan of people who push the limits and boundaries of a certain art form and try to bring them together. Like I'm not trying to say it's in any way comparable, but I'm thinking about a book I released in 2020 with two co-authors, Kevin Oros and Daniel Dick, titled "Sex, Masculinity, and God." And that book is a combination of podcasting, and each chapter has an artwork connected to it. But it was kind of like a real exploration of, really, for me, trying to push myself beyond the academic journal article writing form, and just playing with different mediums and throwing paint at the wall and sort of seeing how it comes out at the end. So I just, I appreciate how experimentally ambitious this is, and retroactively you can say what it is, but I think what I've learned from art is you really can't put a concept on it before the thing. It's a retroactive process.
Yeah, actually, to that very point, my initial idea was, oh, it'll be like a post-apocalyptic sort of like sci-fi epic over the course. And then I was like, okay, well, I've never written that, and I haven't tried to do actual like creative. I mean, I'm not a creative writer. Okay, I guess maybe in some respects I'm a creative writer in that um, the lyrics are creative writing, but I'm not a novelist or a fiction writer who has a great command of the craft. And so it also seemed, the more I was thinking about it, I'm like, it could be kind of forced. And so that if I tried to go through with that, it could have worked, but that was more of like, okay, I've created this for myself, or I'm in this box and now I have to sort of fill it, or fit into it. Whereas I kind of got 3 or 4 songs into the writing of the lyrics and everything, and it was either, okay, I continue going in this direction, or I take a step back from it. And I was just like, no, just sort of push ahead. um, but yeah, you know, you you worry a little bit, or I worried a little bit, like, okay, is this going to be, how abstract is it? Is it going to connect with people? But I have heard from people that, even, you don't, I mean, you don't need to know or get all the references or all of the theory. For it, that's what I was worried about. Like, is this going to just fall completely flat for people who are not in this particular niche? And so far, based on the feedback we've been getting, that's not the case. It works on that. It works on a level if you're just approaching it without the background. But if you do have the background in philosophy and critical theory and psychoanalysis, it's an added bonus, I guess.
Well, let's just geek out about it.
Yeah.
Let's go into the added bonus. Let's just start with the concept critique of pure desire. Of course, like for me, this is such an important concept. Of course, it comes from Zizek and his inspiration, his philosophical. I feel like it's really the move. What Zizek's done with psychoanalysis is he's sort of moved psychoanalysis properly into the domain of philosophy and linking the concept critique of pure reason from Kant to the critique of pure desire with Lacan as like, I mean, such an ingenious maneuver. So maybe let's just start with that. Like, how do you understand this concept? Why is it? Why why were you so inspired by it, so to speak, that you'd label your album critique of pure desire?
Yeah. Well, actually, just quickly before I go into the meaning of it, that's another reason why I liked your point about it almost being like a graphic novel or a philosophy book in a way, because the title is obviously troping on Kant's critique of pure reason, and Slavoj is doing that as well. So from what I've been able to pin down or see, I think he first maybe he used this phrase or articulated it in some of his earlier writings before he was writing regularly and publishing regularly in English. But I think he first mentions or first floats this idea that Lacan's project is a critique of pure desire in the preface or introduction. I think it's the preface to Tarrying with the Negative. And then he comes back to it a few years later in a piece that was, I believe it was first, it might have been published as an essay. No, I don't think so. I think it was first published in the Blackwell Zizek Reader from 1998 or 99, titled, well, it's the Zizek Reader, but the piece is titled Kant with or Against Sod. Although now that I'm thinking about it, there's also a little bit of that in For They Know Not What They Do, but I don't think he uses critique of pure desire there. Anyway, what he means by that, and the album actually, so I kind of have a prop here, but the and the actual CD, like beneath the disc, Slavoj, this is I don't know how well you can see it, but this is Slavoj defining critique of pure desire. What he means by it, more or less. But what he means is that, so for Kant,
Let's do a little experiment.
yeah, yeah. Oh,
You
there
see
we go.
that?
That's much better. That's much better.
Let's do this. I was
Okay.
wondering, like, can I just share this, and I think it'll look good. So let's go
Okay,
through it.
that's
Let's
cool.
go through it. There you got it.
Yeah. So okay. So what basically what Slavoj is saying here. So jouissance is the pleasure beyond the pleasure principle, the non-pleasurable pleasure that's associated with death drive or pure desire. And there's Wells's illustration of Oedipus Rex, the opening song. But for Kant, as he says, as Slavoj says in this little excerpt, that so how to put this? So ethics for Kant cannot be pathological, meaning it cannot be self-serving or self-interested, and it belongs to the realm of pure reason and not the realm of the sensuous or the sensible, right?
Mm.
So, and that's the whole point of the metaphysics of morality for Kant, is that it's the exact opposite of something like a utilitarian ethics that's based upon the greatest good to the greatest number. It's Kant's term for this is deontology, right? Kant's ethics is deontological. It is a duty-based ethics. So you do the right thing solely because it is the right thing to do, even if it costs you your loved ones. Now, Slavoj has written about this quite a bit, but where the issue, or where the sort of terrifying aspect of that comes in, is that for Kant, the moral law, the categorical imperative, is, I think Slavoj has written about this in so many places, but I think he writes about it most clearly and succinctly and convincingly in interrogate his book interrogating no the indivisible remainder, the one that's on Schelling. And it's he's that is a great distillation of this. So the moral law tells you to do your duty, but it doesn't tell you what your duty is. And that's where the anxiety and the burden of freedom comes from, right? I think one of Slavoj's recent books is called "Freedom: A Disease Without a Cure," right? Because when you're confronted by the moral law, it's terrifying, and part of the terror is that it's an abyss. The subject is responsible for filling in or for deciding whether, like, what your duty is. And so that's where the terror of, like, the ethical choice or the ethical act with a capital A, like Antigone, who's the subject of the second song on the album, Let Them Rot, and a song that Slavoj appears on, has a spoken word section, a spoken word part on. That is a radical ethical act in the Kantian sense. But where desire comes in is that typically we think, now Kant, I'd have to be honest, go back and see if anything Kant specifically says about desire. But typically we would link desire with the sensible or the sensuous, right? So like gratifying one's base
Right.
desires or something like that, right? Or like
Yeah. It's
and
animalistic.
animalistic, right? And so it's materialist in that way, not idealist. Like, I mean, it's a transcendental ethics. But what Lacan articulates throughout various of his works, and I think Seminar 7, The Ethics of Psychoanalysis, is the seminar that has the most influence, or that this album is most influenced by with regard to psychoanalytic theory. But for Lacan, desire, it's not that it can't be sensuous, but pure desire, which Alenka
Right.
Zupančič talks about this in her book Ethics of the Real, and probably elsewhere, but that at some point desire, pure desire, becomes basically, could mean death drive in a way. And there's, a lot of work has been done on
Yeah.
the interrelation between desire and drive, and also
Yeah, that's fundamental, right?
differences. That's fundamental, right? I mean, Adrian Johnston, Todd McGowan, like a bunch of people in this orbit.
Could you say, like, when we conceptualize desire as a positive object, we're thinking about it in the sensual domain, but when we go to the level of pure desire, it's kind of being removed of its sensual content. And you confront the empty placeholder of desire, so to speak.
Yes, because, right. Well, this dovetails perfectly with Lacan's notion of the objet petit a, which
Exactly.
Slavoj references in this this little excerpt about Critique of Pure Desire that you have up here. But yes, because the objet a is it's not the actual person, place, or thing, whatever
Yeah.
the
It's not
material
a positive
manifestation
object.
of it is. It's not a positive object. It's that, like, I think Slavoj refers to it at one point as like the sort of unfathomable X, or the certain, like, je
Yeah.
ne sais quoi,
Je ne sais quoi, yeah.
that attracts you to it, right? And so you could say that in a way, let's say it's a person, as in the fourth song on the album, which is about Hitchcock's Vertigo, D'entre les Morts, right? So the character of Madeline from Hitchcock's Vertigo is the objet a, but it's not necessarily, her positive attributes, even though he remakes the woman, Judy, who he wants to turn into Madeline. The object itself is transcendental, I think Slavoj often refers to the objet as a sort of quasi transcendental object. And so, but in pursuing that, desire and drive are both at work, right? One of the main distinctions between them is that um, desire, um, desire, you're perpetually pursuing the object,
Yeah.
um,
You're in
and
the mode of chasing or trying to recover the lost object.
yes, yes, trying to recover the lost object that never existed, right? For
Exactly. Yeah.
Lacan, it's
Yeah.
that it's a retroactively generated object as a
Yeah.
result of the cut or castration of our entry into the symbolic, into language, right? And
Exactly.
so the objet a is you're trying to, and that's why there's an overlap. I think they are different in certain regards, but I'm not that I'm not that steadfast about distinguishing in every instance between objet petit a and das Ding. I think in some regards they do overlap, even though they are different.
Right.
But the thing is that drive cares nothing about satisfying you or actually getting the object. Drive is all about the surplus enjoyment, the jouissance that is generated by continually circling and continually failing to actually arrive at or to obtain the object.
And
And so
it's like
drive,
this, and
yeah,
its dimension that you're saying here, like, linking it with the Kantian moral law, it is itself beyond self-interest. So it's also a
right,
domain, in some sense, uh, from a certain perspective, haunts us or torments us, but at the same time brings some kind of ineffable enjoyment that we can't live without.
right, right, exactly. So when in this description, Slavoj says, it's about 7 or 8 lines down, right after the critique of the first critique of pure desire in Black. In contrast to Kant, for whom our capacity to desire is thoroughly pathological,
Yeah.
since, as he repeatedly stresses, there's no a priori link between an empirical object and the pleasure the object generates in the subject, Lacan claims that there is a pure faculty of desire, since desire does have a non-pathological a priori object cause, and that's the objet petit a. But the point is that desire becomes pure or purified and non-sensual, but transcendental, when it has to do precisely with the non-pathological nature of it. And the act, this is why Zizek frequently says freedom hurts, because the ethical
Yeah.
act, it doesn't always have to end. Now, many of the examples are tragedy. It doesn't always, like Antigone is quintessential, and that's why she is, for Lacan, the main sort of exemplar of not giving ground relative to your desire, which is his gloss of the ethics of psychoanalysis. So willing to you think that desire is going to lead to, colloquially, in the non psychoanalytic sense, that desire again is about gratification, is about satisfaction, but pure desire is the opposite of that. It's not a gain. It's something that you lose. The emergence of subjectivity comes at, it doesn't have to, but it often comes at the loss of the ego or the self.
I
That's
like.
why it's pure. It's a lot of these examples are self-destructive, or they end in death. Right? Antigone is buried alive. She ends up taking her own life. In a lot of the Poe stories that I
Right.
base
Edgar Allan Poe.
songs
Yeah.
on, it's all about undermining the self. Right? In the in the interest of following this object that is beyond, it's beyond materiality, but it's beyond the pleasure principle, right?
Absolutely. I wanted to emphasize that I really love the way this quote ends, and frame this in relationship to, let's say, the pathological desire, where you're trying to close the gap, you're trying to retrieve the lost object that never existed. I think the most important dimension of drive is this maintaining the gap. So you're trying to maintain the gap instead of close it. You're trying to stay with it, and I think that's why this abyssal dimension of freedom is so terrifying. And so, but at the same time, I feel like, I don't know if you agree, but like I think that this maintenance of the gap, I think that's where real art comes from. I think that's where real philosophy comes from. I think that's where real inspiration. So, in some sense, those memes where you have like the really kind of uptight, well-to-do couple who, it says, the type of person who reads philosophy, or the type of person who goes to an art gallery, and then they have like a disheveled, crazy-looking person, and it's
Yeah.
like that's the person who makes philosophy. That's the person who makes art. Like it's because
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
maintaining the gap.
Yeah. Well, the idea of the gap is so important to, um, well, to Lacan and psychoanalytic theory, but also it's there in Kant as well. I mean, Kant basically says, if we knew what our duty was, or if there was no anxiety, I'm sort of paraphrasing, and this isn't exactly what Kant says, but the upshot of it is that if we knew what the right thing was, if we could actually access the thing in itself, or if the moral law wasn't just purely formal and contentless, if the content was given to us, we would no longer be free and autonomous. That gap, which I think you can explain, or you can use Lacan's notion of the que voy. Like, what do you want? What does the other want from me? And I mean, this is a pretty stereotypical or typical example of it, but right, Abraham, when he's about to sacrifice Isaac on the altar, right, and God intervenes, but it's the idea of the opacity of the other's demand, of the other's desire, what the other desires of you, right? And that is what Lacan would say. That's what hystericizes the subject. It's the hysterical question: is que voy? What do you want? What does the other want from me? But if you close that gap and you know what the other wants, then you're no longer free or autonomous. And I'll give you an example. And this is an example from Slavoj's work. I think he talks about it in, I think it's Plague of Fantasy. It's either Plague of Fantasies or Fragile Absolute. I think it's Plague of Fantasies, where he writes about it as well. But he talks about it, I actually think, more convincingly or more interestingly in The Pervert's Guide to Ideology, when he's talking about Full Metal Jacket and the character of Leonard, Gomer Pyle, as they call him. He identifies with this sort of super egoic command of the drill sergeant. Like, he becomes that super ego, and then he runs him, like, that is not his act is not an ethical act. It's a perverse, sort of sadistic act of violence. But that's what happens when you close the gap between, like, when you take the voice of the superego as the voice of the moral law and conflate the two, and don't insist upon that gap between, Lacan would say, the enunciation and the enunciated, right? So your point about the importance of the gap, from perspective of not just psychoanalytic theory, but psychoanalytic and Kantian ethics is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, I love that. And great example. I actually recently rewatched Full Metal Jacket. It's a phenomenal film, and
Yeah.
that character is just, yeah, I mean, it's just such a
Oh,
perfect example of the
yeah.
unity between, or how there can be a unity between superego and death drive, right?
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, and also, like, just Vincent D'Onofrio and R. Lee Ermey, is that who the drill? Just amazing performances. Yeah.
Amazing performances. It's a
Incredible.
fantastic film.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I also wanted to say about maintaining the gap that just because we're currently in the middle of teaching with Michael Downs on the technological singularity, and
Mm.
the book Hegel and a Wired Brain by Zizek, I think that he also emphasizes in that book that the emergence of the brain computer interface, and the motivations behind people who are building the brain computer interface is, it's about closing this gap. It's about
Right.
keeping,
Right.
it's about, not being able to maintain the gap, and that if we close this gap with the wired brain, then we lose any symbolic mediation. It also reminds me of Anna Kornbluth's work on, capitalism and the style of capitalism as immediacy.
Idiocy. Yep.
That's also about closing the gap. This comes up, throughout theory. I think it's such a crucial point. Let's go to the next song, and
Yeah.
I'll put up the lyrics, because what I want to do is connect it to what we've been talking about with desire as pathological, sensual, versus pure desire
Mhm.
as non-sensual, transcendental in some sense.
Mhm.
And the lyrics in Oedipus Rex,
Mm.
where let me yeah, let me bring that up again, where I love the lyrics here, where of course you're repeating, someday we will all go blind. So like that's here, like a direct reference to like the non-sensual, or like I also like this, this insight that Zizek makes on the Oedipus complex, that Oedipus is the only one who doesn't struggle with the Oedipus complex. Like
Right. Right.
this dimension of things. And I just want to say, like, the themes that emerge here, the narrative that stuck out to me: take the throne, claim the queen, slayed the king, laid the queen. And then this theme running out of, someday may you. There's kind of like, correct me if I'm wrong, like kind of an ironic dimension to someday you may see the world through Oedipus's eyes. But like I
Right.
want to connect this to the sensual and the non-sensual, and the desire and the critique of desire.
Yeah. Well, so for this song is, and it's true of Let Them Rot, which is the song that follows it, and that's to the right of the lyrics for Oedipus Rex. That's the illustration for Let Them Rot. But um, those two songs, like Sophocles' plays, incorporate the chorus into them, and so the someday we will all go blind, the take the throne, claim the queen, slay the king, lay the queen. That's the chorus, and then of course the chorus is actually sung by the chorus, right? Like they're the ones speaking there. So what I wanted to do, I didn't purposely, again, like realizing this retroactively, was rather than it being told. I mean, Oedipus is he's not the sole speaker of the song. The chorus has just as many lines, if not more lines, than he does. And the someday we will all go blind was actually, that was the last thing that I wrote for the song, because actually before I put that in, when you listen to the song, first of all, the song has like a 50-minute like swell intro where it before everything kicks in. So if there
You mean
was
50
no,
seconds?
what did I say? 50.
50
What did
minutes.
I? 50. Yeah. No. Oh
Not the
God. No.
swell.
50. Yeah. 50 seconds. Yeah. No. Don't. No. Don't. Yeah. 50 seconds, not 50 minutes. Yeah. I want people to actually listen to it and not for 50 minutes of what the hell is going on. But if we didn't put that someday we will all go blind there, which is the first sung lyric on the record, it would be like a minute, almost 2 minutes until any lyrics came in or any vocals came in. And so that was basically an experiment. Like, let me see how this works. And we just did it in like 5 seconds really. And it ended up working. But I liked that because it reinforces the universality of it. So even if he doesn't have, if Oedipus doesn't have the complex, the point, like, someday you may see the world through his eyes, is trying to speak, right? Is it the piece on little Han, the study of little Hans? But where, Freud says, like, calls, we're all little Oedipuses in a way. And the universality of that complex is what led me to say, someday we will all go like we're all Oedipus in a way. And that's why the bridge before the, like, around the 5-minute mark, before the like acid rock freak out jam session of the song, the "Come my children, come
Yeah.
take the cup, come drink the blood of Oedipus's eyes,"
Yeah.
is like a it's like you're being initiated into this. It's almost um, uh, like a Black Mass or a Black Sabbath or something, right? Except what's being consecrated and what's being imbibed is you are joining this sort of universal brotherhood or sister or personhood of of a subject of desire, the desiring subject, that is split between conscious and unconscious. And of course, Oedipus, that's why he's the Freud's exemplar of that, right? He knows not what he does. In fact, he commits the prophecy in the very act of trying to escape and flee from the
Right.
prophecy, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's I guess the tragic
Yeah.
comic. You could say it's a tragic comic dimension of things.
Yeah. And what's the line from Oedipus at Colonus? The well, just because you have the lyrics pulled up, but obviously, the what goes on four legs, then two, then three is right. That's the riddle that the Sphinx poses to Oedipus, and he solves it. But then when I say when Oedipus says, "Had it been better to eat and be than to be crowned the ruler of Thebes," I should have pulled up the line, but what does Oedipus say? And like better not to have been born, or
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, well, yes, you became king, but would it have been better if I never had even existed, right? Given what I had to put, what transpires of becoming the king, and what I've done unwittingly, unknowingly, in becoming king and married to the queen who is my mother, right? Yeah.
Right. So let's go to the next ones. Let them rot. And I think that this one is also a conceptual gem in many ways. I mean I can sort of point out like the things that stuck out to me. I love the sort of the reflections on second death and the undead that I am. Um, Also the way you end it, there is a law all of its own that I must abide, and decide to take death as my bride. I think we could connect that, for example, to what we were talking about with Kant's moral law and its
Hmm.
connection to Lacan and the death drive. But yeah, what was going on for you with this song?
Well, that's exactly right. That's exactly it. Is that, well? First of all, in addition, I mean, Slavoj appears on the track and has a minute 6 second spoken word part during this very
Is this
orchestral
or
movement.
is Carnival or is Let Them Rot like the lead single, so to speak?
Carnival was the lead single, but
Yeah,
Let Them Rot is the most, like, that's gotten the most attention. I like Carnival a lot. I think Let Them Rot is that, and another song, Malangini, are, like, for me, those are my two
those are
favorites.
the standouts.
But for me, and Let Them Rot, even if Slavoj wasn't on it, that would still be one of my favorites. But the fact that he's on it, but I did want to
Yeah.
say that, and obviously he's written about Antigone multiple times. He has that rewriting of the play along the lines of the Tom Tykwer film Run Lola Run, where it's the three different endings he stages at the end of it. But Let Them Rot is the title of one of Alenka Zupantich's recent books,
Yeah.
and the subtitle is Antigone's Parallax. And
Right.
so this is just as much, the content of the song is just as much influenced. I taught Alenka's book, Let Them Rot, not this past spring, but so it would have been spring of 2023, I guess. And, I mean, it's a brilliant book. I mean, Alenka is brilliant, but it was influenced by it. So for instance, she's the one I had never really paid much attention to the line, because the line, "Let Them Rot," because the line that comes from, it's just before she's about to enter. If I'm remembering correctly, it's just before she enters the tomb and is basically condemned to it. And that's when she says to Creon and to the chorus and whoever is witnessing this, that if it were if it were anybody else, if it were my husband, I could find a new husband. If it were a child, I could she's a teenager. I could bear another child, right?
Right.
But because it's my brother, and a brother born of the same incestual, I mean, that's what the first verse is, right? Like, little then did we know we were born of the very self same sorrow. You're a brother like no other, impossible to be replaced. So she says, if it were any of those other people, I'd let them rot. And of
Right.
course, that has to do with burying the corpse, right? Because the act that she commits is, despite the avuncular decree of death that Creon has issued, right, against anybody who dares to bury the enemy, and in this case, it's Polynices, right, who has waged war on his brother to try to take over the throne, and so I'd let them rot. I wouldn't bury them, or put dirt on them and make sure that all the burial rites were performed so that they could actually move on to the afterlife, right? So that insight by Alenka and how important that line is was really inspirational to me. And but the idea, like, this desire won't expire. If piety impious be, I'll suffer for the right in me. And then there's a law all of its own, I must abide. You're totally right. That I'm directly referencing the idea of the moral law and the categorical imperative. But the whole point of that, it's a law all of its own, I must abide, is the idea that it's no one has given this law. It is self-directed. It is self-given and self-imposed. And that's why, I mean, and there's no better example than Antigone of Slavoy's claim that freedom hurts, because she, in deciding to commit this act and burying Polynices and going through with it and going into the tomb where she enters into the realm between the two deaths, her symbolic death, and then eventually her actual biological death, that this is a law that she is giving to herself, and that's the subject's freedom, the subject's autonomy. And so it's all about following the moral law that cannot be prescribed
Right.
from a different authority.
Right. It's derived from the subject's own confrontation with a loss that's impossible to bear.
Yes. Yeah.
I
Right.
mean, I think the crucial thing here, like going back up to the lyrics, "You're a brother like no other, impossible to be replaced." I'm thinking about this like in regards to like how I see like a lot of like the normative dimensions of our culture is we treat people as if they're just replaceable, like just swipe left, swipe right. I can, if that
Mhm.
friend drops, I can just get another friend or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
everyone's kind of this replaceable avatar. But like confronting this dimension of someone who's literally unreplaceable.
Yeah. And so the irreplaceability also dovetails with the impossibility, right? And so
Yeah.
he's impossible to be replaced in that, literally, right. I mean, not this would happen anyway, but Jocasta's dead, and Oedipus is blinded, he's gone, right? But it's the notion that the real is the impossible, as Lacan says. But as he also says, and as Alenka stresses, Slavoj stresses this, the impossible happens. And this is an example of the impossible happening. Like this self-sacrifice. It's not impossible in the sense that people don't make sacrifices for others every day. That happens all the time. But it's impossible, particularly if we're thinking along the lines of self-interest, right? Like, who would make this decision, or who would do this? What's the grounding for it, right? And the point kind of is that there is no grounding. That's part of it. You have to provide the grounding and make that decision. That's the sort of leap into the abyss. I wouldn't say leap of faith in a Kierkegaardian sense, but that is like you're confronted with the abyss, and to act is to actually to make that leap into the abyss, right?
I feel like it's, and I don't want to get ahead of myself theoretically here, but there is a line that has inspired me from Zizek where he tries to link the resolution of the Oedipus complex and Christ.
Mm,
And I think that that link between Oedipus and Christ is something that I want to pay more attention to in the future. But what I really want to connect it to, why it comes to my mind in regards to what you were saying about the, the abyssal dimension of the act and the law, is that and the groundlessness of these of the impossible real, is that I think so many people want a transcendental guarantee. So many people want a transcendental law. So many people want the law to pre-exist them so that they can avoid the burden and the anxiety of their own of the critique of desire. I think.
yeah. No, I think that's right. I mean, I actually think this is going a little bit far afield too, but it just reminds me of um, the like a politician sort of hiding behind like the proceduralism of the law or something, so as not to actually
Right.
have to make a decision. And I'm not like this is not this is not an endorsement of like Schmittian decisionism necessarily, but um, but there yeah there is something like you because you can also hide behind the law, right? You can
Yeah. Yeah.
also
Yeah. Yeah.
not you can use the law as an excuse not to act, right? Well, we can't do that because we have to change the law. And I'm not, again, this is not like well do something illegal, um, but yeah, the law, and of course, from the psychoanalytic perspective, the law is never just neutral. The law also has this obscene underside of it, or this obscene jouissance connected with it, or tied to it. And so sometimes the transgression of the law, even though you might think Slavoj talks about this a lot, that like transgressing the law, or that you think doing breaking it is transgressive, it actually is oftentimes quite reactionary and conservative, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, what's coming to my mind is like the way in which we can conceive of the law to be like eternal and self-generating, almost like without any subjectivity, like it's just handed to us by God,
Right, right.
versus kind of the way in which, let me just like theoretically speculative sort of attempt here is to
Mm,
say that that law originates in the real blood and the real pain of an impossible subjective situation. But then it can become kind of the dead letter retroactively, like when
mhm.
in a sense. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to get
Yeah,
at there?
no, absolutely. And I think that I mean you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think it's related to, and I think he also Slavoj does say this in the portion or the section of indivisible remainder that I'm thinking of. It's a section. I think it's a section of the chapter called desire. Desire is the desire of the other, or desire is desire of the other, right? But using the law or using duty as an excuse, like right, like you can't say how does he articulate it? You can't say you can't make a decision and then say and it's a horrific decision and then say oh sorry I'm just an instrument of the law, because that's then you're in the perspective again of perversion, where you're literally I mean perversion in the precise psychoanalytic sense, or the Lacanian sense at least, which means that you are an instrument or object of the other's jouissance, of the other's enjoyment, of what Lacan in his essay Kant avec Sade would call the will to jouissance. And I think that's what happens when, to go back to when we're talking about the example of the character of Leonard, Private Pyle from Full Metal Jacket, that when you collapse that sort of distinction between enunciation and enunciated, that's when you become nothing but like that's why it's so perfectly fitting that you see he becomes Leonard becomes obsessed with the rifle. The rifle becomes like it's almost like an organ without a body. It becomes this sort of instrument. He becomes the gun himself. Like that's why I think it's so perfectly fitting that the way he ends his life is he kills the drill sergeant, which is the voice of the superego, and then he kills himself. He has
It's
become
kind of
the
like the
instrument of
embodiment
death.
of the. It's kind of like the embodiment of the missing phallus, right? The missing,
Exa- that's exactly what it is, and that's why it's perfect that it's a gun. And literally, I mean, the U.S. military. I mean, the U.S. Marine Corps. It's hard to get more phallic than that.
right.
But all the rich and Slavoj talks about this as well. But all of the obscene marching gestures, right? This is my rifle. This is my gun. They're grabbing their crotches. This is for fighting. This is for fun, right? And so, yes, literally becoming the almost like the phallus, the sense of the what Lacan calls lamella, right? The undead, the
Yep.
undead mortified but undead pulsating enjoyment, right?
Totally. Yeah. So that's a really great reference. I think. I mean, the next. There's a few things. There was a few other songs that I really that stuck out to me that I really wanted to discuss.
Yeah, whichever ones
One
you
of
want
them.
to talk about.
Yeah. One of the ones that stuck out to me. I wrote down quite a few of the lyrics. Was "Waking Aphrodite."
Oh, okay.
Let me share that one. Just a
Yeah.
sec. So waking Aphrodite. We've got like this, I think, really interesting reflection on like say it's like can I say it's like the pure hysteria of the feminine that doesn't want to be reduced to the categories of the mother or a woman, but is like trying to feel out where her freedom is. Like I'm here speaking specifically here, like about the way the song ends, where it says she's reborn, she awakens as a subject of desire, not a
Yeah.
mother woman. She'll no longer consent to be nothing but mother and wife, abyssal solitude, no more husband or brood, to clip her wings and tie her down with no will of her own. Um, yeah, that those are
Yeah.
like that was like the dimension of the song that was most resonated or was the one I wanted to reflect with you.
Yeah. Well, this song is really interesting with regard to the rest of the album in a number of different ways. It's tonally, it's very different. I think from the rest of the record. Thematically, I think it connects it very well with the rest of the record and is just a variation on the same theme. But musically, it's very different. The initial title that I gave to it before I knew sometimes so whenever I write the music, I'll usually give the song just a working title and then Carnival, for instance, that was titled Carnival from the very beginning before I even knew what the content was going to be because formally and just at the level of the musical form, the music is carnival-esque in a way, and there's a carnival organ in it. The drums have this like waltzy triplet beat, like dun 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 dun, dun like almost like like you're going to a carnival. But Waking Aphrodite is much softer. It's not a wall. I mean, there are a lot of guitars. There's a lot of guitar in every song, but it's not. It's not like high gain, distorted guitar. And so I initially titled it Interregnum, like the break between like the sort of two onslaughts that are the first five tracks of the first songs of the record, and then the final four, which then get heavier and more aggressive. But the song, the inspiration for this song is Kate Chopin's novel The Awakening, which is it's from 1899. It is very much a feminist, I wouldn't even say proto-feminist. It's a feminist text. And the main character in it, Edna Pontellier, is she married young. she married a businessman. It's not a particularly passionate or erotically charged uh, marriage or relationship. It's basically it's not a marriage of convenience, but it more or less is. So her husband wants her to be a mother woman. So that term mother woman it comes from the novel itself. A mother woman is somebody is a woman who lives to serve her husband and her children.
Yeah.
It's the Victorian it's the Victorian ideal of what was called the angel in the house or angel of the house, who does all the like takes care of the cooking, the cleaning, and watches after the children, and really has no personal desire or ambition of her own. It's all subsumed
Right.
by what's best for the family, what's best for the husband. So, but what happens over the course of now, she they have two children. So she's had sex, but she is awakened erotically to desire over the course of that novel, and it's the content is dark. I mean, the novel. For those of you who haven't read it, I mean, this is a spoiler, but it's over 100 years old. But she ends up committing suicide by going into the sea, and a major moment of the novel. It's
Oh,
about
that's
it's really
wild. That
about
that's how the song ends, is freedom lies beyond the waves.
yeah, well, exactly. So, and it's not the song is not intended to to glorify the choice of suicide or anything like that. And that's what the novel, I mean, Chopin came under a lot of fire when she published it. You can imagine in 1899, a woman who decides to over the course of the novel, she rents a house separate from her husband and children. She has two affairs, but it's right at the midpoint of the novel. She doesn't know how to swim. She learns how to swim, and it's under this mystic effulgent sky, and there's a million stars, so I'm referencing the novel there. And it's both like jouissance, it's both thrilling and terrifying, because she swims out. She just learns how to swim, and for one moment she thinks she swam too far out to be able to get back to shore. And she was never in any danger because people were her husband was watching her and everything. But that moment is when she sort of awakens as this subject of desire, I think, in the psychoanalytic sense. And there's a lot of meditation, or a lot of about the sea speaking to her and whispering to her. And so it's actually it's a tragic ending, and some people read it like that, but other critics have read it as triumphant. That this is her no, basically, exclamation point to the symbolic that would relegate her to being purely a mother woman. So it is the sea really is the sort of her confrontation with the real of desire,
Hmm.
and it both embraces her and but like a siren, like a siren song, you wreck yourself on the rocks. But in so doing, she does articulate, or she does realize, a certain freedom or autonomy there. And it's totally non-pathological in that it literally ends. It leads to the end of her life, right?
I mean, here you just get the. I'm just thinking about the the dimension of feminine subjectivity that has to deal with this kind of
Mm,
reduction to being an instrument of the reproduction of the species,
right.
and then you know paradoxically finding freedom at like like that there's no alternative identity, like and but it's like you have to befriend, well, I guess it's befriending the gap, it's befriending the non-identity itself. And does that always have to lead to a literal biological death? Or is there a way in which we can have sort of a higher perspective on the way to maintain this gap and carry oneself in the non identity?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I don't know. I mean, I'd be interested to see actually what you think about this, because maybe one way to try to answer it, and maybe this is a bit of a I'm punting on it, or sort of deflecting,
Well,
but
it's a tough one, right?
yeah, well, it's a tough one. But the literary examples that I'm drawing on, and I think literature more generally seems to suggest
Ah,
that
yeah.
this is the path, right? So, um, let's see,
Like
Antigone.
specifically suicide
Yes.
or an abyssal solitude?
No, well, in abyssal solitude, right? Like, I'm trying to think of an example that doesn't that doesn't. I mean, they all pretty much end in death. So even in the examples, um, like the song Malangini, for instance, which is based on Poe's Imp of the Perverse, and another story of Poe's where he talks about what he calls perverseness, or perversion or perversity.
I'll put that up
And
here.
yeah, and it also is a play on Descartes' figure of the evil genius. The great deceiver that he, over the course of meditations, ends up dispatching with. But I don't know how necessarily convincingly or not. We could talk about that. But in this case, the characters don't die, or the narrators of those stories don't die. I mean, even though the vocals are, it's not the last. Okay, maybe instead of maybe this is a kind of pivot or a different way of trying to articulate or answering
Yeah. I
your
wanted to
question.
discuss this as well, specifically this
Yeah,
idea,
yeah,
the way you
yeah.
talk about being a victim of a mortal drive.
Okay, right. So the chorus, it's not the last time you'll die, victim
Yeah.
of immortal drive. Right. So maybe that's one way. Maybe, okay, so death doesn't necessarily, let's put it this way, there are fates worse than
Yes.
than death,
Yeah,
and
fate's
that
worse than death.
fate would be to be the victim of the immortal drive. And because, right,
Mhm.
so Zizek gets this from Lacan. It's there in Lacan, but I think the degree to which the degree of its importance was not articulated as clearly until Slavoj really called attention to it.
Yeah.
Drive for Lacan is not right. Well, first of all, Lacan, he does say death drive, but Lacan abolishes the distinction between eros and thanatos, or like the life drives and death drives, where you have this dualism in Freud. For Lacan, all drives are death drives, right? So that's why you have drive in Lacan, as opposed to like specifically articulating often death drive. But against this notion that the death drive is this some sort of, I think he's talked
Will
about
to
it
self
earlier than this.
destruction.
Yeah, I'm thinking of I know he's talked about it earlier than this, but the instance in Slavoj's work that sticks out to me is in Parallax View, when he
Okay.
says this idea of the death drive as will to destruction, as like the nirvana principle,
Yeah, yeah,
like this
yeah.
yearning, is not at all what,
No,
like, to return to this quiescent state, right? And that's
no.
basically, if you're reading
Like
Freud's
equilibrium, a return to inanimate
equilibrium, right?
matter.
It's not that, right?
Yeah,
Death
exactly.
drive,
You,
drive is it's undead.
I
It,
know,
it,
yeah,
it
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
It's such an important point.
yeah, so I think in a way that maybe I guess I would want to say that the answer, I have to think about what my answer would be. But what the answer, like the annals of literature, literary annals tell us that the answer is, to take a Lacanian notion, is like death or worse in a way,
Hmm.
because to be the victim of the immortal drive, it's all these sort of like little deaths,
You know,
that don't
Zupančič
end up killing you, right?
Zupančič has the idea of and she has this great section in What Is Sex where she goes through death drive as a construction site where if you
Mm,
go from Freud's idea of death drive as nirvana principle to Zizek's notion of death drive, you get this idea that actually what death drive is this working with higher and higher order tensions. So it's not like
yeah.
this dissolution of all tension, it's working with higher tensions. And I wonder if that's the secret to not being a victim of a mortal drive.
Mm, yeah. That's a good point.
She
Right.
also says
Well,
this
yeah.
line from Samuel Beckett of um, die again, die differently.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I also, I'm thinking about is it in? It's either in Pervert's Guide to Ideology or Pervert's Guide to Cinema. These are both on my mind because I assigned clips from them for my graduate theory class that I'm teaching this semester. But when he's talking about like Tom and Jerry cartoons or Looney or like Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote,
Right.
just the undead nature. I think it's Pervert's Guide to Cinema because I think it's alongside when he's talking about the Marx Brothers, but just the sort of undead nature of that, and he talks about Harpo Marx as being the mute brother, and Freud's point that drives are silent, right? So he's like id. He's also drive. But I think that the note, right, Lacan he's talking about lamella in Seminar 11 when he says this, the organ without a body, but insofar as it's an object of the undead drive, I think you can say the same thing, that it's immortal, indestructible life. And so you could say in a way
Yeah.
that even if it leads to biological death, there's nonetheless something that's life affirming about it. And I'm not qualified to. I mean, I'm qualified to speak, but I haven't read it
Right.
recently. But somebody who tries to take, in addition to what you were citing from Alenka, one psychoanalytic theorist who tries to take Death Drive and read it positively, or the sort of creative, generative potentials of it as opposed to the destructive, is Mari Rudy.
Oh yeah.
And so I think so. I wouldn't say that it always has to go back to your way back to your question. I wouldn't say that it necessarily always has to end up in death, but I would
Yeah,
distinguish
exactly.
between death and death drive, and then I would say that I'm not going to have good examples of it not leading to death. So, but what do you think? I'm interested to hear, in addition to that Alenka point, like what your take on this is.
Well, I've actually just written about this. I just published about
Okay.
this in the latest Philosophy Portal anthology, which is inspired by
Okay.
Lacan Zikri writing for a first cause. I've got an article in there that
Okay.
is arguing, and it's kind of like, and I'll get your opinion on it. Is it like
Yeah. No, I'm
I'm
gonna read
not,
it.
I'm not, I'm not arguing that Slavoj is wrong to stick with the term death drive. But I
Mm,
just had the idea, especially from reading Alenka Zupančič, What is Sex, when she's going through the reconstruction of the concept of death drive, that
yeah.
and also from like conversations with people who seem to really struggle with the notion of death drive, or like are confused by it, or find it to be like a
Yeah.
mystical, like obscurantist concept, like what are we talking about here?
Yeah.
Like it's almost like I'm trying to say like maybe we should rebrand it as a mortal drive. Like I know that Zizek,
Mm,
like he says for example death drive is Freud's name for immortality. Like he says that
right.
just directly, like
Yes.
in a very straightforward way. But I know that Zizek's fond of like calling it undeadness,
Mm-hmm.
rather than immortality, because we're not talking. And I think his reasoning for this is that we're not talking about like a sublime heavenly form of immortality. We're more talking about like this, like you mentioned, like Tom and Jerry.
Yeah.
But like I also like he talked about Zizek used it to talk about like video game subjectivity, like in Mario, where it's not that you're immortal, it's that it's like you're undead and that you can never die. Like you die and then you're reborn immediately and you have to keep going. Like, but
Yeah.
it's like this kind of dimension but at the same time, like I feel like I'm just for strategic purposes, and the reason why I wanted to talk about this part of your album as well is
Yeah.
you saying the victim of the immortal drive, so you're calling it the immortal drive as well. And
Yeah.
the way I'm thinking about it is like I think Lamella is also Lacan's name for immortality in a way.
Yes.
It's like this. The way I think about it is like that just in biological terms, and I've even like tried to connect this like with Richard Dawkins' notion of selfish gene, because
Mm.
Richard Dawkins was interviewed about that, and he said that actually, if I could go back and retitle my book, I would call it the immortal gene, because his point
Oh,
is just that
interesting.
the gene line just goes on forever. Like
Yeah.
and like the idea I had just from a biological perspective, I know it's not reducible to biology, but like just from a biological point of view, if the universe was not somehow thermodynamically predisposed towards drifting towards complete entropy,
Yep.
then life itself is kind of immortal. Like we're just the agents, we're just the units of a larger process, which in principle could just go on and reproduce itself forever. But that there's something about the psyche that's immortal. And and like that's also something I think we can connect to Freud, because, he talked about like like the unconscious as wish fulfillment, or even like that on the level of the unconscious, we actually don't even believe we die. Like
Right.
we
Right.
like they just go on forever. So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is like, how can we talk about the immortality of the drive and like the affirmation of life without falling into this kind of, well, like directly like Bergsonian vitalism or like
Right.
affirmationalist philosophy, while at the same time, like it's much more of a negation of a negation still. Like it's
Yeah.
at work. So these are some of my like current thoughts about
Yeah.
it.
No, that's great. And actually, you mentioning that right, because the unconscious knows no negation, right?
Exactly.
But the unconscious also doesn't know death. It doesn't recognize
Right.
death, right? And
Right.
so there's actually the first line, when you were saying that, it made me think of it. The first line of the second verse of Carnival is, who knew one could really die? Like, um, realizing that, oh, actually, I don't know who's speaking there. Like the point of drive, right? Of course, is that it's unconscious, and this is why I think repetition compulsion. It's no surprise that I think death drive emanates, or Freud arrives at it by way of repetition compulsion, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
Alenka talks about this in, I think this is all in that. I think you're thinking of the last, it's the final chapter of What is Sex, the one that's called Object Disoriented Ontology,
I
right?
think that's it.
Yeah.
That's my favorite chapter.
Yeah, that's an amazing. So an excerpt from that is what appears. A portion of that is what appears as her chapter in the Subject Lessons collection that you were mentioning. That's reprinted from What Is Sex.
And it's just
But
such a great play on object oriented ontology.
yeah,
It's
no,
like
it's so
it's
good.
so
It's so
good.
good.
It's
Well,
like the
because
perfect response.
yeah, well, because right, and this is why I wasn't there to witness this, but at the first LAC conference, the organization that Todd McGowan and Hillary Neroni co-organized with Jennifer Freeleder and Henry Cripps. But the first conference, I want to say, was 2012 or 2014, maybe no, 2014 or 2016. But Joan Kopchak was there, as was Levi Bryant. And so I did not witness this, but and maybe I don't think it did happen. It's not apocryphal, but I don't know if it happened verbatim like this. But apparently, um, Levi said, introduce himself. I'm an object-oriented ontologist, and Jones' answer was, I'm an object A ontologist,
Oh,
because
nice.
the
Yeah,
object
that's good.
the object A is what disorients from the
Exactly.
Lacanian perspective. That's what disorients reality and what disorients the ontological plane, right? And that's
I
why for
think
Alenka, yeah,
it's also like I think important. Like again, we were discussing this with I think it comes up as a key distinction in Mikey's book about Land and Zizek, because it's like Land is focused on this kind of capitalistic teleology, and
Yeah.
Zizek is focused on like this dimension of retroactivity, which in some sense demands that you stay with a kind of disorientation as opposed to
Yeah.
reifying and that I think is just like I think that's the purest form of ideology, right? Like the purest form of ideology is like this reification of a teleology where you know where you're going and you know the full outcome and full reality and the full result before you actually act it out.
Well, this is why
That's it, yeah.
this is why Slavoj's reading of Hegel is so important, right? I mean,
Exactly.
because I mean, if anyone has become erroneously the poster child of teleological thinking, it's well, I mean, you have a few examples. For one,
Yeah.
you have the end of history thesis, which really is not Hegel's thesis, and that's like that gets overplayed as a result of. I mean, Todd McGowan has written about this. The erroneous amount of attention that's been paid to philosophy of history, but then also the erroneous notion that the Hegelian dialectic unfolds by way of thesis, antithesis, and then clash and resolve in some sort of higher synthesis, right? And that's not at all what is actually going on in Hegel. Well, thesis and antithesis are not these two discrete, mutually exclusive, cordoned off or siloed entities that then clash. It's actually like the antithesis is built into the thesis and is undermining the thesis from within, and you certainly do not get synthesis in Slavoj's or Zizek's his version of Hegel, which I think is the correct one. And so, in a way, yeah, you can see why he would be so intent on pushing back against that as a Hegelian, because it's a fundamental, like, conscripting Hegel to the quintessential example of teleology, and so much so that Francis Fukuyama basically relies upon Hegel for his notion of we've reached the end of with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the USSR, we're at the end of history, right? We've arrived there just like Hegel said we would. Totally a misprision, a misreading of Hegel.
Yeah, and I think that of course, this is like kind of like the standard pop Zizek that I think is so interesting and lured me into Zizek's philosophy is this idea, that of his kind of subtle critique of Fukuyama and the end of
Yeah,
history thesis. And I think that Zizek himself occupies this interesting place of maybe we could say a time between worlds, but like it's a time between the end of the Cold War, the abstract universalization of neoliberalism, and the almost inevitable failure and cracks of abstract neoliberalism, where I feel like Zizek's very historical performance is like the truth of the crack of neoliberalism.
yeah. I mean, and also the fact that he's coming out of the former Yugoslavia, right? I
Oh
mean,
yeah, he's
he was
so interestingly
yeah,
positioned here.
yeah. I mean, he was runner up for. I mean, he almost ended up getting elected president of the newly formed Slovenia in 1990, and then of course you have the outbreak of nationalist violence in the Balkans throughout the early to mid 90s, and which and so Fukuyama is saying one thing, and then of course like all of these, if anyone could speak to, if anyone was positioned to negate that thesis or to speak to that thesis, and I love how recently Slavoj he points it out a lot that Fukuyama has kind of gone back on that and is, I don't know if he's
Yeah.
endorsed Bernie. I mean, Fukuyama was a neocon, but the idea that is, I mean, look at where we are now politically. I mean, clearly it's not the end of history. If anything, we're going back
No, no,
to
no. It's actually
we're
no
going
like
back to
that.
the authoritarianism that led to the greatest catastrophe of the great catastrophes of the 20th century.
Absolutely. So I think that like the way I was introduced to Zizek, the way I came into his philosophy is kind of it's at this level, I suppose, that I got lured in. which is I see him as the return to proper historical thinking. It's like a return to, well, it's a return to thinking like the unity between the absolute and history, and and the way in which no history is much more open, and going to be much stranger than let's say the university discourse of neoliberalism
Right.
would have led you to believe. And I think that for me, I was I was trained in a neoliberal university, and I think that for a lot of people, Zizek functions as a kind of breaking of this illusion, or breaking of this teleology.
Well, I think that's why he's so interested in, right. He reverses the notion of he reverses the notion the uh, of the contingency of necessity to the necessity
The
of
necessity of
contingency.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right? Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Because, right, he says this often. Hegel, was not this thinker, who, thought he encountered the absolute, he could, relate the absolute or realize the absolute, and that history is on this, history. It's far too neat of an understanding that you have, because you do have confrontation in it, or you have conflict, right? That you have, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. But that's not Hegel's point. Is that history is open. It's wildly contingent, and it's only that's why. Like Zizek's theory of the event, of course he's also in conversation with Alain Badiou on that, but is that the event can only, in a way, like retroactively be the event, or an event happens and then it shapes what happened before retroactively. And he uses a good literary example for this, right? With Kafka. You can't say before Kafka that some stories of Edgar Allan Poe's or something are Kafkaesque, because it doesn't make sense, right? Logically, or if you're going like from a linear progression, or the point that he made in one of his earliest books, Looking Awry, that I'm sure drove a bunch of, historicists. You said there's a key here between being historically attuned and historicism, or being a historicist, which he often critiques. He critiques the historicist as almost as though they're outside of history, or they're speaking from this meta-linguistic position outside of their, socio-symbolic cultural milieu from which they're speaking, as though they're not, their subjective position is not embedded in it, right? But the notion that, again, history is far more open and contingent, and so he's got that claim where he says this in Looking Awry: Shakespeare had definitely read Lacan, right? But it's the idea that, to go back to the Kafka and Poe, it's that only after Kafka, it seems like an obvious point, but can Kafkaesque be applied to the authors who came before him, right? And so the time, the time is out of joint. It's not a this linear progression, this
Yeah,
teleological narrative that we can, don't worry, we'll get there, we'll arrive at it, right?
I feel like even though like Nietzsche is often put in the lineage of Deleuze and Guattari and then Land.
Right.
I feel like Alenka's reading of Nietzsche focuses on Nietzsche as this out of jointness, like
Yeah.
focuses on Nietzsche as a character. Like you should read Nietzsche as someone who is constitutively out of joint, or even the Overman as someone who's constitutively out of joint, which is kind of, I guess we could say it's like the anti-teleological reading of both Nietzsche and the Overman.
This is why, I mean, Alenka's book is a great example of this, but this is why I still am fond of, not all of it, but I still draw upon and I still teach Nietzsche. I don't think Nietzsche can. Of course, there are reactionary and conservative elements of Nietzsche's thought, but I don't
Yeah,
think that Nietzsche can be. I don't think Nietzsche should be dismissed just as this reactionary thinker that many of our leftist friends. I agree that's there, but I think there's this other dimension of Nietzsche's thought that's worth. That's I mean, I'm not going to go around singing Nietzsche's praises all the time, but I think that that element of that out of jointness that Alenka's reading gets at is what's worth salvaging from Nietzsche, as distinct from either the conservative streak, the reactionary streak in Nietzsche on one hand, or the vitalism that
Right.
Deleuze and et cetera, take away from or foreground and spotlight in Nietzsche.
I tried to, I guess, challenge myself in reading Nietzsche and trying to pull out kind of the, well, I argue anyway that there is actually a dialectical negation of a negation logic in Nietzsche that more than we think. Like I specifically talk about the camel, the lion, and the child metamorphoses, like has a kind of like dialectical triadic negation of a negation logic to it. I also think that there's a great theologian, Thomas Altizer, who actually wrote
Mm.
and there's actually a conference between, you probably know, like there's a conference with Altizer and Zizek on Christian atheism,
Yes.
which
Yeah.
is quite good. And that link was surprising to me, but like fruitful as well. He wrote the Gospel of Christian Atheism, and
Mm-hmm.
he sees the link between Hegel and Nietzsche as well. And sort of argues actually that there's so many aspects of Nietzsche which, although anti-Christianity, are actually quite similar to Christ. So there's
Mm.
a way like that. There are more readings of Nietzsche, of course, than the one that's just along the Deleuzian line. But I feel like we've been talking around the final song on your album, like in
Yeah.
a way, future history. So like let's
Yeah.
just bring it up. Let's just bring it up directly. And there's a lot of things like I think here for me specifically, this this section where you're talking about time and space cannot contain the excess of a mind once flayed by images you can't unsee that you rewind obsessively. No matter how deeply repressed, they'll return like unwelcome guests that pull the strings behind the scenes and underwrite your future history. That was a beautiful, beautiful passage. But
Thank
yeah,
you.
what sticks out for you in here, and maybe how does this connect to what we've been discussing? I feel like it's intimately connected somehow.
Yeah, no, it is. No, I'm glad that you made that connection. And there's Computer Blood's illustration of Slavoj, along with the spoken word, like the words to Slavoj's spoken word section of Let Them Rot. But for Future History, so Future History is based on inspired by the Chris Marker film La Jetée, the experimental film from the early 60s. The short, what is it, 28, 29 minutes? It's less than a half an hour. But the story there, and I guess I don't want to spoil it too much because I do hope people who haven't seen it would watch it. But I mean, maybe in explaining the song, maybe I should put that aside, but or not really be concerned about that. The the movie, so it's post-apocalyptic. There's been basically World War III, and the film begins underground. Everyone is living underground because Paris has been razed, as I say. So they're living underneath in the sort of tunnels underneath Chaillot, and you have a bunch of people you have scientists who are trying to use test subjects, survivors, in order to go back, either to go back or to go forward in history. Yes, it's to go forward in history to get information from future humans, or to see if we can actually either rewrite the past or save humanity and sort of rebuild it. And the way that they're able to do that, it's constantly failing, these tests, but the way that they're able to do it is because one test subject has a particularly vivid image in his mind, and it's an image of the face of a beautiful woman. So it's another example. Actually, there are a few throughout the album of woman as thing, of woman as Das Ding. And the way that they're, so it actually turns out that what the key to time travel is in the film is actually trauma or a repressed memory, because it's extracted from him. It's a they get they arrive at this image in his mind by doing these tests on him in his it's, he's not conscious of this. So it's extracted against his will, and then they send him into history to meet with this woman, etc. But it turns out that that image of the woman is actually a screen memory, or you can even say a fetish, that is blocking something more traumatic, which is the fact that impossibly, and this made me think of the real, impossibly, the character witnesses his own death as a child. That's the trauma that's being avoided here. And so future history, the very sort of coining of that, I'm sure people have used it before. I'm not the first to say that, but in fact, a friend of mine taught a class a few years ago titled "Future as History," and it was cool. They read some Fred Jameson, they read a lot of cool stuff, but that really resonated with me. The notion of not just time is out of joint. There's the third song on the album is a rewriting of Hamlet in a way, which is where that famous line, the time is out of joint, comes from. That is often cited by Alenka Slavoj, the Slovene, the Ljubljana school. But it's Freud's notion of Nachträglichkeit, of afterwardsness, of retroactivity. And so I tried to, just watching the film, I've seen it so many times, I've taught it before, and I just couldn't escape the fact that it was this traumatic memory that was repressed, that is the key to, well, I say, the key that unlocked the door that had blocked every attempt to rewind the clock, and it was a screen memory. So the use of, actually, this film directly posits that the way to travel or to possibly achieve time travel is through the unconscious. And then I started thinking about Nachträglichkeit, or what, in French, Lacan's term for this is après coup, right? But the notion of not only coming at something delayed, but the idea that, again, it's the psyche. We were saying earlier something about the immortality of the psyche.
Yeah.
That the psyche persists, and then I was thinking of the return of the repressed, right? For Freud, right? It's not that the primal scene happens, you're traumatized, so you repress it, and then it comes back. The trauma occurs when it returns, right? When it returns from the repressed. That's when the event. So the event only becomes traumatic,
like an unwelcome guest.
As well. Yeah, yeah. So a lot of that is what is informing my. And I think this isn't so much a reading or interpretation of the film, as it is that this film. And I'd have to, honestly, I haven't. I know that there have been some psychoanalytic readings of it, but at some point I should see what Chris Marker, like, if he was influenced by it, because the film just begs for it's psychoanalytic at its core, I think.
That's awesome. And then, just because of convenience here, we've got the, I think, very clear quote from Zizek, the reading on "Let Them Rot." And what stands out to me there, and like connecting it to our conversation, maybe even bringing it full circle in a way, is again like highlighting this distinction between pathological desire of sense versus the non-pathological transcendental desire.
Yes.
As in, specifically, what sticks out to me here is Antigone becomes a frighteningly ruthless figure, one who is exempted from the circle of everyday feelings and considerations, passions and fears. So it's kind of like you become this kind of this figure that seems alien to the world of to the common everyday world, but yet she's walking here in the common everyday world and as this kind of alien being almost.
Yeah. Well, it's because she's made the impossible choice, and so you have you have a subject you have a subject of the real that
Yeah.
manifests itself in, like, impossibly in our everyday material, reality, right?
Yeah.
In the symbolic. And so that's why she appears to, I think Ismene, her sister, is like, doesn't even recognize her in a way, right? That's one of the lines about, from Let Them Rot, is, though these thoughts be warm, this act is cold as ice. And so it's Ismene in the play who says that, Antigone has become cold. And I think that that's what Slavoj is referencing when he says that, she's exempted from the circle of everyday feelings and considerations, passions and fears, because when you traverse, when you go, I mean, you could say, sort of, I'm tempted to coin, like, beyond the pathological, beyond the pathology principle or something. But when you act or when you commit an act that is non-pathological, um, particularly, it's interesting. Antigone, especially after, like, the subjective turn with Descartes and everything, that to make a choice that is, self-denying or self-negating in the name of ethics. Again, we can all think of an example of that, but, the people who do that, usually they're lauded as, as heroes, like, oh, it's such a selfless act, right? But because of the deontological, non-pathological element of it, it can turn you into, what to others seems like this cold, monstrous,
Yes.
inhuman,
Yes.
undead, figure,
Yes.
right?
Yes, very well said. And I guess just like the final thing, Zizek's philosophy here is so tied to the act, abyssal freedom, but then here saying that as such it's political. It's like this is kind of the zero level of Zizek's politics, right? It's like it's not in some sense, the dead given law or whatever. It's the abyssal act. It's the groundlessness of our freedom where the political emerges in a sense.
Yeah, and I think so. What's interesting about this is that, is it the final chapter of Less Than Nothing? But I think he's used this formulation elsewhere as well. But is it, what's the title of it? Like a plea for return of the, or like a political suspension of the ethical or something like that. And it's
Right.
the idea that the discourse of ethics that was so prevalent in, I mean, just I think of, especially the later Derrida's work, is very much, a turn toward ethics, even though you have a ostensibly political work like Spectres of Marx. But, and I'm thinking of the Levinas, and, a while ago there was, that's it, the political suspension of the ethical, and there was, the ethical turn in the sort of 80s, 90s, in a lot of, philosophy, especially philosophy, the realm of philosophy and literature. And just to be like, that's what I was kind of schooled in, actually. When I was in graduate school, I did a lot with, 18th century moral philosophy. I mean, in particular, Adam Smith and the, Scottish common sense philosophers, and sympathy as, the moral sense. And so I've always been interested in philosophy, literature, and psychoanalysis, in morality and ethics. And I think, though, that it's not so much that, if you focus on the ethics of psychoanalysis, that it's like either or. Like, in choosing that, you're neglecting the politics of psychoanalysis. I think that, similar to Slavoj's point, that in order to arrive at, the sort of materialist core, like, you need to actually go through Christianity in a way.
Yeah.
That in order to arrive at a politics of the drive, for instance,
Yeah.
and Todd McGowan has a whole book on this.
Yeah.
I think you
Yeah,
have to.
I
I think
love
you
that.
have to go through the ethics. I think you have to go through the ethics of psychoanalysis in order to arrive at the political dimension of it.
I love that. I mean, I love the way that I've always appreciated that about the Slovenian school's work, is the way in which they really, I think the first, they're the pioneers who have developed a philosophy and a politics that is really on the other side of psychoanalysis, like taking it just, taking its understanding, taking its method, taking its concepts beyond the clinic. And I think that there, in as a consequence of that, I do sense that there's kind of this not well articulated, still kind of unconscious tension between clinical Lacanians and the Slovenian school for this
Yep.
reason, in a way, which we don't need to go into. But really enjoyed this analysis of the critique of pure desire. I think it was a great excuse to sort of nerd out about some of
Yeah.
these theory points, and maybe as a conclusion, just yeah, what should people? Of course, we've just given kind of a maybe a nice theoretical support for people who haven't listened to the album yet. Maybe they'll have a be able to engage with it in a different way. But I'll give you the final thoughts in terms of the album and what you hope people get out of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I just looked at the clock and realized we've been talking for 2 hours, but it's
There
been
you
so,
go.
it's been so much fun nerding out about theory, and that,
Exactly.
that it didn't even seem to me like I mean, we were talking about the album, but this just seems like a to me, it
This is a
flew
theory
by.
sesh.
Yeah, it's like literally, I was like, it feels like we've been talking for maybe 10 minutes, not 2 hours. But thanks so. I just want to say, thanks so much for having me on to talk about it, and for, I mean, really, going through it, and you're in the ideal audience for this, because you can see that line from the chorus of Antigone and know that I'm referencing the moral law, right? Or that I'm
Yeah.
referencing, what critique of pure desire means. So, I just hope that people continue checking it out. For a while, since late August, it was available only through the band's website, misconstruity.com. But as of Friday, October 3rd, you can, I mean, the whole full album, there were 4 singles from it that you could listen to that were on YouTube and Spotify and everything, but the whole album now is available on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, Apple, like basically anywhere, everywhere you get your music.
Cool.
And I'm really glad that you talked about the artwork, because I mean, and also showed it. The digital download of the record comes with not just the music, but that PDF of the book, and it's also, I made it OCR searchable and scannable, so you can actually Control F and find all the desire, or Antigone, and keyword it.
Oh, nice.
And but we're also going to hopefully press it as a vinyl, as a double vinyl. But what I'm most looking forward to with that is that the art booklet that comes with the CD will be, as opposed to it's like almost 4.75 inches or whatever, will be a 12 by 12, like 24 inch, or not, well, 12 by, yeah, the full thing will open up to 24 inches. So it'll just be even more, to your point about it being kind of like a graphic novel,
Yeah, no,
on a
no,
larger
no,
scale.
no lying. I'm gonna be. I'm pumped to actually be getting a proper office space in the next month or so, and I want some of this artwork on the walls in my office. So I think it's that good. I think it's a real achievement, and I have always suspected that I've chosen the right philosophical path, because the types of people who are in this scene are starting to create art and music and literature around all this philosophy, inspired by this philosophy. So your work is yet another sort of beacon for me that this is sort of the fruits. You'll know them by their fruits, and I think this is a beautiful. Yeah, I
Well,
think this is a
I,
beautiful fruit.
well, thank you. I'm very honored to be considered among that community, and among that group. So, yeah, just thanks so much, Cadell, for having me on to chat about the album, and just to cut it up about theory and philosophy.
All right, everyone. It's been Russell Sbriglia with Cadell Last. pick up a Critique of Pure Desire. Links in the description. I highly recommend getting the actual digital booklet or a physical copy of it because it's worth it to listen to the album while going through the fantastic art that accompanies it. So thank you so much, Russell. Critique of Pure Desire, and we're out. The portal is a living, thinking community. Becoming a member of the portal gives you access to 4 live events every month, but more importantly, an opportunity to learn how to think with others, to learn with online creators and para academics, and to develop your own capacity as a philosopher. Becoming a member of the portal also gives you access to the history of our recordings, as well as discount access on past and future courses. This year, members also get exclusive access to the Slovenian School Reading Group, as well as the year-long course focused on Deleuze and analysis. To learn more or to sign up, visit philosophyportal.online.